You ready to go? Okay. Welcome, everyone. We see people are coming in. The attendees number is rising steadily. Great. We are really thrilled to have this, to be hosting this fantastic event. I know it's going to be fantastic already with these rock star women, as I was saying before you all started to join. As you come in, I just want to welcome you all on this Friday. We have various different time zones joining us, and are thrilled that technology allows us to make this happen, but we also hope very much that we can do an event in person in the very near future. So stay tuned for more news on that. So I'm Katie Shanahan-Lindner, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for European Studies here at UNC Chapel Hill. I just have to say Priscilla Layne is one of our most favorite people here on campus. I'm happy to say that and go on record being recorded saying that. And we're thrilled that today's discussion is about her journey and what a beautiful piece of art has been made about her journey. So I'm just gonna thank you all for coming. Really looking forward to the talk and the discussion. And please be active in asking your questions. Put them in the Q&A function, please. And I have the honor to introduce our fabulous moderator, Elizabeth Biz Needham. And she is a settler scholar and lecturer in the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, of course, where she lives and works on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. She is currently finishing her book manuscript, Graphic Historiography, East German Memory Discourses in Comics and Graphic Novels with Ohio State University Press, which is just, we can't wait to hear about that too. Business research and teaching interests include the representation of history in comics and new media on forced migration, intersections between Indigenous studies and European studies, and feminist methodologies in the graphic arts. Biz also sits on the executive committee of the International Comic Arts Forum and the executive board of the Comic Studies Society. Thank you so much for being here today, for agreeing to be our moderator. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you again for this opportunity to moderate this conversation. As I was expressing right before we started hitting record, it's been my privilege to be part of this journey as somebody that was at that GSA conference that's referenced at the beginning of the volume, and bear witness to the beginnings of this graphic novel and where it is today, and how I think it's going to shape a lot of discourse to come. And so I'm really honored to be now part of this journey explicitly as a moderator of this conversation. So thank you for that. And so before we begin the conversation, I'd like to introduce our two speakers today who are intimately connected to this graphic novel, Rude Girl, in all the ways, as I'm sure you're familiar with, having hopefully had the opportunity to read the excerpt that was posted, the English introduction and beginning to the graphic novel. So first of all, let me introduce Birgit Weyhe, who was born in Munich in 1969. She spent, who is the author, the artist behind the graphic novel. She spent her childhood in East Africa and studied literature and history in Constance and Hamburg. After graduating from art school, Birgit Weyhe has been working as a comic artist in Hamburg. Her graphic novels have been nominated for several prizes in Germany, France, and Japan, and her album Mad Germanist received the Berthold Leibinger Stiftung Comic Prize in 2015 and the Max and Moritz Prize in 2016. As Best German Language Comic. And in 2022, she was awarded the Lessing Scholarship of the City of Hamburg. Then we have Dr. Priscilla Layne, who's the subject, the topic, the inspiration behind Rude Girl, who is an associate professor of German and adjunct associate professor of African Diaspora Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her book, White Rebels in Black, German Appropriation of Black Popular Culture, was published in 2018 by the University of Michigan Press. She has also published essays on Turkish German culture, translation, punk, and film. She recently translated Olivia Wenzel's debut novel, 1000 Serpentinen Angst, which will be out in June. She is currently finishing a manuscript on Afro-German Afrofuturism and a critical guide to Fassbinder's The Marriage of Maria Braun. So thank you both for joining us. We all three hail from different time zones. I myself, speaking to you from the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in Vancouver, British Columbia, and then the two of you on the other side of the world and the other side of the continent. So I want to welcome you both.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Biz, for that welcome.
So to start the conversation, because we want this to be discussion based, and I have many questions for you, and I will start the conversation, and we'll be waiting for some contributions from our audience to continue to generate the dialogue that you so artfully started actually in the graphic novel itself. And I think dialogue is such an important way of framing this project, which I love. And I think the comics medium itself really speaks to how we can represent dialogue in a way that's really innovative and captivating. But to start us off, I would love to have you two talk about the origins of this project. You do so in the introduction, but I would encourage you, for those of us in the audience that haven't had the opportunity to read that, I would love to hear you frame how you came to wanting to do this piece, what the response to the short version was, and how the two of you came to decide to turn it into a longer graphic novel.
Actually, maybe it makes sense for me to start first, how I became interested in Birgit's work. So yeah, I had heard about Mod Germanis, I think, when it won the prize. And I was really fascinated by the topic because I've always liked working on East Germany, and my work primarily focuses on racialized minorities in Germany, reunited Germany, or in the West. So I was curious to hear more about these experiences in the East. And when I read the graphic novel, I just was really impressed by it. I really liked the way Birgit handled a lot of the subject matter, dealing with trauma and trying to represent diaspora and cultural misunderstandings. So when I had the idea of writing a paper about the way that race is represented in her work, I decided to read everything else that she'd written, because I looked at her bio and saw that she had lived in Kenya and Uganda. And I thought, that's really interesting, to have a white German artist who spent so much time living in African countries, and that just brings a unique perspective to this. So I bought her other graphic novels. I happened to be living in Berlin at the time on a fellowship, and I read the rest. And then I thought, the past few years, whenever I've been working on an artist who's still living, I always think, I should email them and see, if they'd be open to chatting, especially since I was in Germany at the time. And so I emailed Birgit and said, can I come to Hamburg to interview you? And it just so happened that she was in Pennsylvania at the time. So I guess I'll let you take over from there, Birgit.
Yeah, when I got your email, I was at the Allegheny College in Pennsylvania, and but then we met on this, what was it actually, Germanistic German Studies thing.
GSA, yeah.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh. Yeah, and then you came to, when I was back in Germany, you actually came to interview me in Hamburg, and when I took you back to the train station, then I started to ask you questions, and I remember that I asked you how comes you got interested in the German language, and you said because of Indiana Jones, and this was so funny for me that I thought let's make a little comic about it. And then it came to the Tagesspiegel, where I had a monthly strip, but when I then went to Berlin to interview you for this strip, it was so much you already told me then about your life that I said as a joke, wow, this is it's more than a strip, it's like a really big comic book. And then you said, yeah, why don't you do it? And first I thought it's a joke, but then the longer I thought about it, well, there's so much in your life that then I thought, well, maybe we should try. But it really took a long time for me to find the right voice, because I couldn't really write it as I I would be Priscilla. So yeah, I think it took nearly a year until I got the idea how to do the book.
And what was the response to the shorter strip that you had? Did you get any commentary that encouraged you to pursue this further? And from your readers, did you receive any emails? Did it powerfully impact your readers in such a way as you were inspired to continue this project?
No, actually not, because I hardly got any reaction on my strips. It was really, I think only twice somebody wrote to me. But when I started to draw this strip, I also started to read a lot about a lot of literature around all the topics Priscilla had touched in the interview she gave me. And I was really, I got really hooked. So I thought I really would like to try to do this book, even though at the same time I also got this cultural appropriation thing in Germany a lot more, because then the discussion started here in Germany, which started actually much later than in the States. So this was also something where I also thought, do I want to get into this discussion, yes or no? And but then I also thought, yeah, I really want this book to be alive. So I just tried.
Yeah, one of the things that I found so powerful about your book is that it's as much about your journey through this material as it is about Priscilla's life, and they're separate. They're separate journeys that really complement each other, and I think you strike that balance really well by not doing the work of establishing ownership over Crystal's story, because she's not framed as Priscilla in the narrative itself, but in the excerpts that frame the narrative, Priscilla steps in and comments on her observations of your characterization of her life. And then I was really struck by, at the beginning, at the end, you enter as the authorial voice, talking about how you came to this. And those first 3 panels I found really profound, because they felt very cinematic, in the sense that it was like a road movie where you're on this journey that then changes you. And the graphic novel opens to you on a highway with these billboards. And I thought that framing in the beginning, which felt to me very cinematic in the sense that it was akin to the journey of a road movie, really profound. So I really want to commend you for the way that you framed this entire work as multiple journeys simultaneously.
Thank you.
If I could chime in for a second. Yeah, for me, it's interesting because, like you said, it's not just about my journey, in the US and in Germany, but it's also about Birgit's experience in America. And I just think it's interesting because those first few panels where she's in this small town, I get that, I've seen that part of the US, but then my story of growing up in Chicago could seem so bizarre, and the complete opposite. And so I also like that it shows there are different narratives, in the US. And the other thing I was going to say is that part of what inspired me, I think, to propose tackling this cultural appropriation issue in this way was Birgit illustrated a graphic novel called German Calendar No December, where she collaborated with I think a Hungarian, Afro-Hungarian author to tell her story about or parts of her story about living in Nigeria, and I really liked that too. And I thought, that maybe that kind of collaboration is the way of approaching this issue of cultural appropriation and voice.
Yeah, and I have some questions about the kind of text you've chosen to illustrate over the years. But first, to help to continue to give our audience a sense of this project, I thought that you could speak to the title a little bit, actually, because I found that so striking. And I had to do some research to figure out what it meant, but I'm going to let you talk about that. But I also noted at the conclusion of the graphic novel, it appears as if Oreo is going to be the title of the graphic novel. That's that very final frame that you talk about the book, and then it says Oreo by Birgit Weyhe. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the title, how you came to choose this title, what you think it highlights about the graphic novel, and who kind of led that conversation.
It should have been called Oreo, and this was Priscilla's idea, and maybe she can talk about why. And also because, but the publishing house, the publisher said that we can't call it this way because there's this novel by Fran Ross already with the same name. And then I said, maybe it can has a subtitle, but he said no, because if people just, they will only remember Oreo because everybody knows it, and then they will type it, and then they will just maybe get the wrong book because they only remembered Oreo. So he said, no way. And then luckily we had a lot of, he had a lot of stupid ideas how this book should be called, and everybody had stupid ideas. And then luckily, again, Priscilla had the idea of Root Girl, and I think you can explain both of it much better than I.
Yeah, I mean, my idea of naming it Oreo was, I think, a kind of reclaiming a part of myself or my narrative. A lot of what I talked to Birgit about was, what it was like growing up in Chicago as the child of Caribbean immigrants in a really multicultural neighborhood, and how, when I was young, a lot of times I got the accusation that I wasn't Black enough or Black in the right way. And honestly, that's part of my interest in Black German studies is, kind of pushing back against the narrative that there's a single way of understanding Black identity. So yeah, when I was in school, I would get called Oreo as a Schimpfwort, like people trying to insult me, and it really hurt my feelings. It's actually something that to this day it can be very painful to talk about, because at the time I didn't understand why I was being pushed away, or why I was so inherently different. But nowadays I would say that I'm more comfortable with my identity, who I am, like how I came to be this person, and have reconciled a lot of that past. So that's why I wanted to name it that, to kind of say like this word doesn't hold any power over me anymore. And when we found out that we couldn't name it Oreo, I proposed Rude Girl because I thought I wanted to choose a word from the the punk, skinhead, ska subculture, because that was so important in my life. And I thought Rude Girl is good because it comes from the ska lingo, but also the idea of being a rude person or a rude girl, I thought was very fitting, because a lot of my youth, I was a tomboy. My family, who are more conservative, have Caribbean values, just couldn't understand like why I was, such a tomboy and listening to like punk music and wearing ripped up clothes and things like that. So for me, the rude is also like I'm not bending to their rules, that I think, characterizes a lot of my youth.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that answers a few question marks that I had, because I was like, while I was reading, I was like, why isn't this book called Oreo? And then at the end, I was like, oh, it's supposed to be called Oreo. And now that makes a lot of sense. And Rude Girl, I don't even think that you, I mean, from my research and my familiarity with like ska movements and stuff, I understood, but it took a little digging, which I think might have been one of the most powerful parts of naming it Rude Girl, because it connected so many ways to the story and required a little bit of exploration on my end to make sense of that title, but giving it also a very distinctive character, because it felt layered from the get-go, that title, Rude Girl. I really like how you talk about using the Oreo was kind of reclaiming something, an insult that was lofted at you from your childhood, and then sort of establishing that it doesn't have any power over you. At the same time, however, your name is Crystal in the story as opposed to Priscilla, and so I wanted you to talk a little bit about when you became a character in this graphic novel outside of Priscilla or outside of Crystal, and what changed for you and that process, and maybe the conversation between the two of you that happened around the naming of the characters.
Like what I'll say is having the character named Crystal through most of the comic helped me have a little bit of distance, because it's such a strange project for me, because in a way I know the readership. Like, as a German professor, I know a lot of German professors or German teachers who may like want to read the book or use the book in class. I may want to use parts of it in class. So I feel like having the character named Crystal allows me to feel like, okay, there's this separation between myself and this character, even if this character is very much, based on my life. I also felt like having the two names reflects my understanding of kind of autobiography, that these are my memories of what happened, right? And in that way, they're kind of tainted through my gaze, right? So if you ask my mother, she probably has a very different memory of how something happened. So that's why, yeah, I felt like it felt right to just kind of split the character away from myself in that way.
I like that, and especially because it draws from Linda Berry's autobiofictionalography, and so this separation between the stories that are nonfiction to us, but are kind of fictional at the same time, and it really respects the blurring of those lines. But why Crystal? Is there something about the name Crystal? Who came up with Crystal?
Birgit, I think you came up with that, right?
I had the idea because in one of our first talks you said that you like Kafka and Bertolt Brecht, and then I looked at the Dramentheorie from Brecht, and then he had this Verfremdungstechnik that he says, and he has this that you don't have this illusion to be. So I didn't want to have the illusion that I'm talking as Priscilla. I wanted to lay everything open, and also like the beginning of the first chapter is sagen wir, nehmen wir an, so it is very open. So, and also to say, and this is not Priscilla, this is Crystal, because it's a figure which I invented in a way based on the interviews, but it's in no way the real story, because it's just it's fiction in a way, because it's through my eyes, through my arm, through my lens. And to always have this in mind, that it's just that I'm just telling a story, it's not my story. And then I asked you, Priscilla, which name you wanted to have, and I think you decided for Crystal.
Now I remember. I have this problem. Whenever I tell people my name, they never hear Priscilla. They hear Crystal, they hear Patricia. This is actually a common problem when I get a coffee, that they don't know how to write my name, or if I spell it, they don't know how to pronounce it. So I think, yeah, that's why I ended up telling you Crystal would work.
That's interesting. So it's kind of like it's your misnomer. It's also the person that people perceive you to be. It's layered because it signals that the story is a representation and fictionalized, as memories often are. That's excellent. Thank you for that. So before I explicitly invite the audience to contribute some questions to this, I wanted to broach the topic of your representation of Blackness. And as audience members, please start contributing things to the Q&A via the Q&A function. So it's interesting that this is the third text that you've written that focuses on the intersections of Blackness and belonging. And I think that that's a theme actually of a lot of your books. Even Ich Weiß, the fourth text, talks about a lot about belonging, but I want to focus explicitly on why you're drawn to these stories about Blackness and belonging, and from various perspectives, which is such a rich library that you've constructed, because it's not one kind of Blackness. It is such a diversity of representations and experiences that's really quite wonderful. But could you speak to that a little bit? Why your work is so drawn to representing Blackness and belonging, and what that does for you and how you connect to it?
I mean, for me, it's I was the only white kid in a kindergarten with only black children, so it's this different switch, and I couldn't talk English, so and I had to not only learn the language, but I also had to learn the cultural codes. But for me as a child, it didn't, the skin color didn't matter. I think as a child, you're not, everything as a child is possible. You can, maybe people can fly, or maybe there are dragons and some people look this way and some people look that way. But for me, it was much more important to learn the cultural codes, or the codes the kids actually, how everything worked, how you had to behave and so on. And this was something I found easy and hard in the same way to deal with, and it's part of my own history. So when I came back to Germany when I was 19, I felt much more a stranger than I ever did before in my life, even though it's my cultural context, or supposed to be. I knew the language and I had relatives there, but still it took me nearly 2 years until I really understood how to, because it was in 88 when I came back to Germany. It was before globalization, before having known everything, because you have handies and computers and so on. It took a really long time. And then I was so shocked that from Germany, the view to Africa is like one big country. It's always Africa. There's nothing which different countries or anything. It's just, and it's very, the view is very stereotypical. So I had the feeling I want to tell different stories, because I wanted to make this continent, or this places I've been, more visible. And then it is a constant journey, because my first drawings, they're really horrible in that sense, that because I only drew with black and white ink, the first canyons I drew, black canyons, they look like black-faced, as Priscilla said in the comic. And so I since then I've always tried to change and to learn, and it's a constant journey.
Oh, and if I can follow up, I thought it was interesting what you were saying, Birgit, about your experience in kindergarten. Because when I think of my son, I have an 8-year-old, this idea that I agree that children perceive difference, definitely. They remark upon it. And I think the problem is that society then tells them, which differences are good or bad, or teaches them the code of what is important. And I see that with my son, because I remember when he was 3, he said to me, "Mommy, are you black or white?" I just kind of stared at him like, "What?" And then he laughed and said, "I know you're black," but he's just joking around. As a toddler, he remarks about difference. But in kindergarten was the first time that another classmate said to him, "Oh, having white skin is better," So that's the thing. It's like, I think children notice difference. Difference doesn't have to be bad for them, but our society starts so early to teach them, what difference we value and what not, that it's just something that I am always keeping in mind.
Yeah, and as a parent myself, I feel like speaking on behalf of white people have such a hard time talking about difference, because they think talking about difference is passing moral judgments on difference. And so having opportunities where we can learn to celebrate difference and talk about difference and identify what whiteness and blackness is, by way of texts such as this that interrogate representations of blackness and evaluate the process of what it is to represent blackness as a white author, I think are really helpful. They help model the kind of critical reflection that white folks need to pursue, as well as revealing like really nuanced histories and the complexity of blackness that cannot be flattened to any one understanding. One of the tensions that, Birgit, as you were talking about what you're doing in the work that you do, all of the work that you do, was this idea of where we're supposed to belong and where we feel like we belong. And so with your own experience returning to Germany, where you're supposed to belong as a German, did not map onto where you did in fact belong. And so all of these stories, even though I'm really emphasizing the blackness in your interrogation of belonging, really just is about belonging, which I think makes your oeuvre very powerful because it speaks to belonging in so many different ways. We have our first question from our audience, so I'll share that with you all and encourage other people to continue popping questions into our Q&A. So Priscilla, thank you for sharing your complex family history. I appreciate learning more about your Black experiences. May I ask how your family, especially your mother, responded to your representation in the novel? And I see you smiling. I feel like you have something
this
to
is
tell
something
us.
I've thought about. It's like, it just reminds me of like when someone has a secret and then they go on a reality show and say, nobody knows this thing about me. So my mother hasn't seen any of the comic. I may have shown her the strip that Birgit did for the Tagesspiegel, but she hasn't seen this. I may have mentioned it was happening in passing, but I would say that my advantage is my mother doesn't read German, so she's not necessarily going to read it. I think that also is part of what helps me kind of put distance between myself and the book, because as long as it's, in the German context, no one in my family is ever going to read it. Now, if it were to be translated, that's another story. But at the same time, I feel like she would probably disagree with some of my representation, again, because I feel like we remember things differently. But at the same time, I'm totally fine with the way she's represented. I try to be understanding of her positionality, her experiences. I mean, that was part of what was also great for me about this project, is because growing up, her and I had a lot of conflict. We just have very different personalities. But I find as I get older, I try to understand more what informed her attitudes about things. So for me, one of the things I love about the book is I feel like the way Birgit represents the story, there are no like bad guys necessarily, like I try to be very fair, about the way people come across.
That's fantastic. I do think you do a good job of being fair to your mother as a mother, reading that. But before I return to the second part of that, the question that was for Birgit, I wanted to remark upon the way that you're talking about language and the importance of language in establishing a distance between your book and your family. But also, I wanted to know, did your conversations take place in English or in German? And how is this shift, or both simultaneously, which might make more sense considering the cultural context, and the relationship that you have to this taking place in the German language? So I think of like Nora Krug's Heimat and the way in which she characterized writing that book in English as a German native speaker helped her have the kind of distance she needed from the history of Nazism to do that work. And so what was the role of language in this project for the two of you?
I think for me it was easy because we really talked from the very beginning until today. I think that's the first time we talk in English, actually. It was always in German. So for me it was and for me it wouldn't be possible to write a book in English. I wouldn't feel at home or comfortable, or no way. But I think maybe for you, Priscilla, this maybe helped. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not something I thought of very much. I feel like if anything, seeing Birgit's representations after we had talked, it just felt like another level of like comprehension of the language I had achieved, or like unlocked, which is hard to explain. It kind of reminds me of the first time I studied abroad in Germany. I finally felt fluent when I dreamt in German. So, and having lived in Berlin for 3 or 4 years, like I have dreamt in German sometimes, or sometimes I recall conversations that were in English, but I recall them in German. So I feel personally very comfortable in both languages. And so the language wasn't necessarily a part of the like distancing for me.
Excellent. Okay, I still have so many more questions, but I really want to give opportunities for our audience to do the questioning, and I'll return to some of my questions maybe at the end. So to turn back to that question about your mother, the second part of that question was that Birgit, you're commended for your powerful drawings, and the questioner, the asker, is inquiring as to whether or not graphic novels are respected as a literature or as literature or an important genre in Germany. And so the positionality of your text in the German canon or against it.
Germany is very bad for comics. It's a very bad country because they don't seem to be a genre which is as high as literature or art. It's something like schmutzig. And I think it's because of two things. I think still of Nazi times, because there was a rich culture of also political caricature and so on. But they either had to go in exile or they were killed, or those who stayed, they were doing Nazi propaganda. So after the war, there was a big gap of illustrators and storytelling with pictures. And the second thing is that the Germans are really, they are very, how do you say in English, hochnäsig, very snobby, because they think they are the country of the Dichter and Denker. They have the highest, the highest literature and philosophers ever. So why should you do comics then? Because this is a really nothing. For me, it's the first time now this year actually that because I got this Lessing scholarship, which is a really, really turn, because it's the prize of the city of Hamburg, which is given every 4 years. And it's always only to philosophers and literature writers, and mostly to men. So this time the little sister of the prize is the scholarship. Is the first time it's a comic artist, and then it's a woman. So it's I'm really honored. So I hope it will change. But doing graphic novels in Germany is hard. You don't have a high. You don't sell many copies. It's all my books sell better in France, even though they have very German topics, but they sell better in France.
It's so interesting because based on how many German comic scholars I see in our audience today, your work and German comics more broadly is very well respected in the field of German studies, which is very different than Germanistic. So I'm glad that at least you get the recognition you deserve when you do speaking engagements in the United States and hopefully Canada at some point. Okay, our next question, 2 questions. I see that the book is out in German, but an English version is the first part of the book, was made available for the event. Is the book slated to be published in English translation as well? Or what was the motivation behind that one excerpt translated into English?
Well, I suggested we translate the first chapter because, I thought for the event, usually at the Center for European Studies, we get some people in the audience who aren't German speakers. So I wanted to make it accessible to anyone, especially since the first chapter deals so much with my Caribbean background. I know several professors at UNC who teach Black diaspora studies, and are interested in that or have students interested in that. So I wanted them to be able to engage with the material, even if they don't speak German. Personally, I would love for it to be translated into English, and I'd be happy to translate it myself since I am a translator. And I know one of the questions was about that. And no, I don't feel like it's too close to translate for me to translate, because there's that one step removed, like Birgit has written it and then I would translate it. So it's not too intimate for me. But yeah, I know from past experience that when it comes to getting a translation published in the US, it can be incredibly difficult. So it all depends on whether or not we find an interested publisher.
I really think you would, and I'd be happy to have a conversation about where I think you should direct those inquiries, because I've been part of the Goethe Institute's Books First campaign, trying to garner interest in German comics as translation. So please don't think that there wouldn't be an audience, because I know for certain that we would find you an audience. And so that answered the question from our audience about translation and whether or not you are interested in translating yourself. So thank you for attending to that question as well. Our next question is about the process of this project. How did the two of you work together? How many interviews, discussions? At what stage did Priscilla see the drawings in progress? How were the revisions approached, and so on? Did it mirror what it looked like in the comic book itself? The breaks in the chapters in which you respond, is that how it worked, or did you respond to the book as it was more complete or less complete?
No, I really started. It was really done chronologically. Only one chapter, the German chapter, I did at the very last. Yeah, it was the very last I did, but every other chapter I did chronologically, and we always had interviews. I have no idea how many we had in the beginning. We always met in person because Priscilla still came to Berlin quite regularly, so I always went to Berlin then to see her, sometimes only for a few hours. I just went by train and we had a coffee and conversation, and then based on these interviews, I decided what part of this I'm going to draw, and then when I had the chapter done, I always send it to Priscilla and she commented on it, and then I draw the comments and then I send it back to her, and then again we had a correction phase, but it went really just like the book is chapter for chapter, and in the end Priscilla still had some, when she saw the whole book, you still had some things which which I changed then.
But I have to say, as someone who, as an academic who deals with publishing, I also tried to not have too many edits because, this is Birgit's book. So, I would say if something was incorrect, a name was incorrect, or a image or something. But for the most part, I try to, I know it's as much of her project as it is mine. So I didn't want to be too overbearing about it.
Yeah, and I think you're a very, very höfliche Person. So it's made it easy for me. Yeah.
Not a rude girl. Noted.
Oh.
Not now.
Also a rude girl.
In my middle age, but I was earlier.
So we have a few questions from the audience about your decisions around selecting colors. Because I think the English excerpt might not have gotten to the point where you start discussing your color choices or the shifts in color choice. And so one participant has a question in reference to colors. The first chapter, the only one I read, has 3 colors. So I was wondering what regards the color choices were. And a second question is intrigued by the use of color, not just black and white, but also accent colors, gold, green, and salmon orange in the book. This participant wondered if Birgit could comment on her choice of colors and the meanings of colors to emphasize or mark certain aspects of the narrative. For instance, the sections where Priscilla comments on Birgit's drafts are in salmon orange only, with the black or gold green that appear in other parts of the story.
I normally, when I started to do my first books, I always did them in black and white only. But then when I started to use color, which was with the Avant-Verlag for the first time, I really liked to have 1 or 2 colors. Everything more than 2 colors is too much for me. I can't handle all the decisions. So when I thought about which 2 colors I would like to use, I wanted 2 colors which if you mix them, they get brown, different tones of brown, which because I then later on, as Priscilla comments, then later on she says, why don't you use skin color? Because as it's now, it's like we're in a post-racial Gesellschaft, society. So it would be better to use to give skin colors to the protagonist. So that's why I decided to have colors which mix in brown if I mix them. And but I also wanted, as I knew from the beginning that for Priscilla, punk and all this was a very important cultural context, I wanted, and orange is it's the outcast of the colors if you're in color theory, because orange is very aggressive and it's never used in good pictures. You have never orange, you have yellow or you have pink, but orange is too aggressive. So I thought this is a punk color. And also for the correction parts, I thought I want immediately to be clear that someone has set the red marks correcting what I have done. So I also thought this orange would fit in. So I then, to mix a brown tone, I then needed a green. And again, I thought, okay, I want to have a rather not nice green, which is a because it's again this root girl idea, which at that point I still wasn't in my mind, but having this punk context and knowing that Priscilla always was with this tomboy thing, which I knew from the beginning, and I wanted colors which are not smooth and nice, but still look good. So it took quite a while experimenting, and then I decided on this 2 Pantone tones, which I used the whole book. They're only mixed and these 2 colors.
One of our participants asked if you named the colors, so like outcast orange and rude girl green. Is there a way that you're going to like imagine these colors moving forward if you carry them into your other? Did you give them shorthands?
I like the names you gave them. Yeah, I will keep them.
When you sell your own paint colors for bedrooms, you get Vias, rude girl green, and outcast orange. Great colors.
Outcast orange is the best. Yeah.
So we have a participant asking about the role of music and punk and the punk community in the graphic novel, and this also ties into a question that I have about your Birgit, your use of popular culture more broadly in all of your work, featuring posters and albums and film, like movie references. And so so if you want to speak broadly to why it is that popular culture is such an important feature in a lot of the work that you do. I'm looking at German Calendar as well, also features album covers, etc. But then also in particular, based on a participant's question about the role of music in the punk community in Rude Girl.
The part with the punk community is Priscilla's part, because I'm totally lost. I think it also has to do with my own insecurity when I came back to Germany, because I felt like totally lost because I had no references. I grew up without a TV. I didn't know the films, the music, the advertisement, the series, nothing. I was really like from a different planet in 1988 when I came back to Munich. So I still feel very insecure, and also about all the films and music Priscilla told me, it was always I had to look at them, I had to listen to the music, I had to look it up, because it's it's not my context. So I also wanted to show I'm quoting, I'm painting the LP, the covers, and I'm showing it because it's I have to quote it. It's not my. And it's in all the books. It's like this. I also had to quote in American Germanists because I didn't live in the GDR. I'm not a Mozambican. I had to quote in German Calendar because I didn't live in Nigeria. I only have been 10 days to Lagos, so I'm not an expert or anything. So that's why I need the quotes. That are meine Quellen, my sources. And for the rest, I think Priscilla is the expert.
I was hoping someone would ask about that. With the music, it was. I think I pitched the idea to Birgit about using a different album cover for the beginning of each chapter, because my entire life music has just been very important for me. I mean, I think I don't think people saw this in the first chapter, but I think the next chapter I'm listening to like the Jackson 5. So I think, starting at age 5, as soon as I could work the record player, basically, I would just listen to music constantly. I started collecting records when I was 10, so for me, it was really important to show, I guess, not just my personal journey, but how that interweaves with my musical journey. But yeah, the punk scene specifically, I mean, it was really a saving grace to me in a lot of ways, because I mean, a big theme in the book is feeling like an outsider, which I did for multiple reasons, but partly because of my family coming from the Caribbean. When I found punk, I think The Clash was the first band that I listened to. I heard them on MTV, Rock the Casbah, but yeah, when I found punk, it was just great that you could be so creative. There were no rules. You could do whatever you want to your hair or your clothes. I started shopping at thrift stores, which was great because we didn't have a lot of money. So suddenly it felt like, until then I felt like I'd spent my whole life trying to catch up with people, trying to blend in. But when you don't have a lot of money, it's really hard. With the punk, that wasn't a problem anymore. Like you were encouraged to make your own things, to make your own clothes. Yeah, and because of the intimate ties between punk and ska and reggae in the UK, that also made me feel like, oh, I've got a little cultural capital here, because I have roots in the Caribbean. Suddenly I was an expert on something, or I knew about a culture that people wanted to know about. And so, yeah, it made me feel less like an outsider. And actually, that was even the case in Europe. I mean, whether in Germany, Italy, the Czech Republic, everywhere I traveled, I would go to a punk show or find a record store. And it was always my way of feeling grounded, I guess, even if I was in a place where I didn't know anybody.
It's interesting to think of punk as a transnational culture of belonging that is grounded in music and class, I think, too. But as you know, the race is not as big of a question in some of these communities. That's not all of them, but in some of them. I really enjoyed the musical journey you two took your readers on, since it brought me back to my own like ska background and punk roots. And so I thought that was an opportunity for me to explore the meaning of this music in my life too, and then see how meaningful it was for other people. Yeah, so I thank you for that. Another question from our audience. After this project on transatlantic relationships to Blackness, do you have any plans to collaborate on comics with members of the Black German community?
No, at the moment, my new project is about the Argentine German connection, because there's a lot of Nazis fled to Argentina after the war, and a lot of Jews emigrated there before, when they fled before the Nazis. And it's a collaboration with an Argentinian historian, which I'm now on. So it's a different cultural journey this time.
But hopefully we'll be returning to these issues of belonging and non-belonging in Germany as well, because I think after all of this work that you've done via these other transnational discourses, I think it'd be really powerful to turn your attention back to these exact same issues as they take place in Germany, and have them emerge alongside some of the learning that you've done by way of this graphic novel.
I actually have a question for Birgit, if I may. I was just wondering, related to this question of like, race in Germany, of access. I guess the question of diversity in comics in Germany. So like, are there conversations among German comic artists about getting more representations for racialized groups? Are there like workshops or things to help people learn the skills to make their own comics?
It just starts. All these discussions have just started, I don't know, a few years ago, and it's mainly in children books, this discussion about diversity in every sort of diversity. With comics, it also starts, but we're really slow in Germany regarding this topic. I have to admit, I think we could do much better, actually.
Well, I look forward to how this book will potentially guide some of those conversations. I hope that you get the readership it deserves in Germany as well. Based on our attendance today, clearly you have that interest in North America. So let's see. We have some questions about the cover artwork. about the choice of the color, the cover art, the color scheme, the layout, and the lettering. I don't know if you have any, who decided what the cover should look like.
The cover was done by a graphic artist from the publishing house, and he because he liked the ideas of all the covers of the LPs, he said he found the Sex Pistols quite appropriate as a as a guideline, and then that's the German book.
Yeah, so it's a riff on God Save the Queen, that, you know, cover art, which is ironic because of all the punk bands that I like. I never really was a big Sex Pistols fan, but I still am happy with it because it's such a, everybody knows that cover, you know, so it lets people know kind of the subject and the themes of the book.
That's excellent. One of the exercises I always love to do when I'm teaching comics is talking about cover art. So thank you for that. I think cover art tells you so much about who the publishers think the audience of these books are, because the artists themselves don't always have as much of a hand in the cover as one might think. Okay, so our next question. Currently, there is much debate around the question of who gets to tell what stories. What do you both think about the difference between cultural appropriation and getting to know and understand the other? If you were going to provide tips for, say, professors trying to teach the difference, what would they be?
Maybe I can start because probably Priscilla knows a lot more than I do. For me, it's a discussion which is as I said, just starts in Germany, and I think I will get not as much positive feedback on this book because again, it's called cultural appropriation because again, I tell a story about a Black person and not my own. But for me, I learned so much doing this book, and as Priscilla taught me, and she really taught me, is to listen, just to shut up and listen, and then trying to find a way dealing with this debate. And I find it extremely important that this debate is going on and finally also came to Germany. But then in the consequence, what would I be allowed to write and draw about? And then is it I have to stick to my age, to my gender, to my cultural background? What is my cultural background? It gets very hard if you start to think it over, what I'm allowed to write and tell about and what wouldn't I be. So I don't think it makes sense from my point of view to have a regulation who's telling which story, but it's very, very much important to listen, especially for white people, to listen and to for once shut up in some respects and just be a bit humble. And
I think listening is huge, and that's something I also had to learn. You know, when I'm in Berlin and I go to Black German events, you know, there are moments I have to catch myself from wanting to talk because I think, okay, this is the subject that I study, but there are Black Germans here who have lived this. This is their history. Like, I need to just be quiet. You know, I don't need to have to be the expert, you know, wherever I go. As for recommendations for professors, I always tell people you don't have to be the expert on something, and don't present yourself as the expert on this culture or this text. I would also reflect on what is it you want students to gain from this lesson, you know, that this text that you're presenting to them. I think if you start with what themes or goals you're trying to achieve, it allows you a way into the text that doesn't just become about talking about, you know, difference or using the text or the author as this expert. I think nowadays with so much online and Zoom and social media, it's also a lot easier to hear from the people themselves. So, you know, whatever population you're discussing, like I'm sure you can find a video clip or a film or something so that you're also allowing the students to hear from them. firsthand. But one thing I want to say is this issue of cultural appropriation. I mean, it's something that's interested me for a long time. You know, it's the subject of my first book. And actually, I've had people ask similar questions of me as of Birgit. So I do the summer mentoring program at UNC, and sometimes it's interesting to see how discussions around cultural appropriation and race and racism evolve, because there was a point in time where it felt like, you know, I would get up in front of an audience and present on something like Walter Benjamin, you know, and people look at me like, why are you talking about this? Like, you know, why aren't you talking about Jamaican immigrants, you know, working in the US or something? And the thing is, I am interested in that. I find, you know, Caribbean history very interesting, Caribbean diaspora, working in the UK and the US, but there's a reason why I didn't study that, you know, in college or in graduate school. I was drawn to German for whatever reason. I mean, at the time, I used to say, because it's not me. There was something fun about studying German because it didn't feel so close to me. But nowadays, you know, I know it's not that I have an objective view on German culture because I'm not German. I just have a different view of it. And I find value in studying it, and I find connections to my own background. But I don't like the idea that because I'm Caribbean American, that's the only thing I should be writing about. And so that's, I guess, my attitude about this more generally.
Thank you both for those insights. I particularly like the shut up and listen instructions. I think that's something that you model really well and talk about in this graphic novel. And I think it's important to have that as a model and how to share these stories. Where we're coming up at the end of our time, and so I wanted to connect a little bit of those two, this conversation, and ask about the intentions behind the audience for this book. So in many ways, it's guided by the language in which you two met and spoke, and Birgit's own place of work and language that you speak in the home. And so the German audience was dictated by the German author, publishing house, etc. But I wanted to know what you think that the German audience can get out of this book. What do you think is important for German readers to be seeing out of this book? What does this book have to teach German readers? And kind of in the context of some of these conversations, but also maybe beyond.
I think it's especially in Germany, it's very important to understand that there's so many different contexts, because Germany is still a very, how do you say, homogeneous society, and still has really a problem to acknowledge that actually so many people from all over the world live in Germany meanwhile, but German and Heimat and all this is still very, very important. And for me, I think what I really found fascinating in Priscilla's story was all these different contexts you had the British context, the Jamaican, the American, the German, whatever, and yeah, that you don't have to be just one. There's not only one culture or one aspect that makes you as a person. And I think for me this is very important to see as a German, and to understand and to learn that there are multiple ways of being, and they're all fine.
I like that understanding that there's multiple ways of being, because it reminds me, this doesn't come up in the book, but reminds me of a time I was whenever I would go to the flea market at Tiergarten in Berlin to look for records. And I remember this one time I was looking for punk records, you know, and I'm looking through the box, and the guy who on the stand came and looked at me, and he was really puzzled, and he said to me, soul and R&B are over there. And I was like, okay, you know, that's nice. But he was just like, oh, what could this Black person be looking for? She can't possibly be looking for punk records. And then I think he was like, oh, and funk is back there, or jazz, I don't know. And so just for me, that's an example of so many times in Germany, you know, I would go to these punk shows and people would just like scratch their heads and just, they couldn't understand me in that context. And I would really like for, you know, white Germans especially to understand, you know, the people of color can move through these different contexts and be composed of all of these different belongings. Interestingly, I thought less about what the book could do for the German market and more for the American market. And maybe because I learned German here in school, and now I'm the president of our Association for German Teachers. And so for me, I was thinking, you know, when I was learning German in 7th grade, you know, and all of my books were just, you know, had no people of color. I like to think that now, you know, in a high school or something, a teacher can use this book in a classroom, and it can like start certain conversations that would bring in a little bit something else into German class. I like the idea of German class being the way into discussing, say, diaspora in America, or, you know, belonging in America. So yeah, hopefully I think in both countries it can get some good reception.
That's such a fabulous way to answer that question. I see so much of that, the way that you observe the meaning, how meaningful your work can be in both contexts. And I look forward to reading the response to these texts as the journal articles emerge, looking at this really rich and wonderful graphic novel. But in the meantime, this is kind of the end of our conversation, which I hope to continue elsewhere and after we turn off the recording. When the pressure is released a little bit. So I'd like to thank you both so much for being available in your various time zones, and even more so because Priscilla, you're currently not even in your home residence. You're also at a conference. So thank you both for taking this time. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And thank you to everybody in our audience today for your excellent questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I hope to see you at the next event featuring the two of you. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Thank you,
Liz, for those great questions.
Yeah,
I have
thank
more,
you.
but they will wait.
Right.
Let me also give a big thanks to Biz. Really, this is a fantastic, what a fantastic moderating job you've done with all of this.
I spend most of my time talking about comics. You can ask anyone. In all contexts.
And your enthusiasm comes through so much, even on the screen. And I really appreciate you taking your time to be here today to moderate this discussion. I love this so much, and I want to get some of that outcast orange for my maybe my kids' rooms, and also this idea of putting that book in American German classrooms would just be fabulous. Priscilla, let's make that happen. So really, there's so much to come from here, and I really look forward to more of this discussion. Thank you, really, to all of you. This is great.
Thank you. It was really great.
Yeah, Biz, maybe you can connect us with the Goethe Institute, that initiative you talked about.
Yeah, the Books First campaign was, I think it was like also, there was, well, I probably shouldn't talk about it while we're still being recorded, but yes, I don't think it's currently going on. There was subsidies for a